The wind moved like a restless spirit across the high plains, carrying with it the smell of dust, sweat, and the faint smoke of distant campfires. It was the late 1800s, and the land was still untamed, still caught between two worlds, one of ancient tribes who had lived with the desert for centuries, and another of settlers who plowed its soil, hammered wood into homes, and called it a new beginning. The border between them was not drawn on any map, but in blood and silence. Outlaws, soldiers, cowboys, and wanderers all passed through these lonely trails, each carving their fate into the wide-open west. And on one fading summer evening, under a sky streaked with dying light, a young Apache warrior lay half buried in dust, her eyes closing as the world around her dimmed. She had fought long and hard, running through canyons and over ridges to escape the soldiers that had hunted her down. Her horse was gone, her arrows spent, her rifle jammed with grit. The wound on her side burned like fire, staining her deerskin dress in deep crimson. Every heartbeat felt like it might be her last. She stumbled through the mesquite and sagebrush, each breath shallow, each step weaker than the last. When she finally collapsed, the earth rose up to meet her, and she thought she had reached her final, a resting place. In her heart she whispered the words of her ancestors, asking the Great Spirit to guide her across. She closed her eyes to die, but fate, as it often does in the Wild West, had other plans. When she awoke, the first thing she felt was not the sting of her wound, but the weight of a rough wool blanket. The air was different too, not the sharp dryness of the desert night, but the warm, faintly sweet smell of wood smoke and bread. Her eyelids fluttered open, and instead of the endless sky above her, she saw the beams of a wooden ceiling. For a moment she could not breathe. She was alive. She was not in the spirit world, but in a room she did not know. It's a place that felt both foreign and strangely safe. The warrior's hand shot to her side. But instead of her knife, she found bandages, pressed tight against her ribs. Someone had treated her wound. Someone had touched her body, carried her here, cared enough to save her when she had been ready to let go. She forced herself to sit up, though pain ripped through her chest. The blanket slipped from her shoulders, and she looked around with sharp, cautious eyes. It was a farmer's houseplane, quiet, built from logs with shelves of jars and simple furniture. A rocking chair stood near the fire, still moving slightly as if someone had just left it. Her mind raced. Was this a trap? Were the soldiers waiting outside, ready to drag her back in chains? Or had she fallen into the hands of settlers who hated her people? She clenched her fists, ready to fight even in weakness. Though she could barely stand, the door creaked open. In stepped a tall figure, not in uniform, not carrying a rifle, but holding a bucket of water in one hand and a cloth in the other. His boots were muddy, his shirt rolled up at the sleeves, and his face was weathered by years of sun and labor. He looked startled to see her awake, as though he had expected she would not last the night. For a long moment neither spoke. Silence between them was heavy, filled with suspicion and something else neither could yet name. "You're alive," he finally said, his voice low and steady, like the rumble of distant thunder. "Didn't think you'd make it through?" She narrowed her eyes, her hand twitching toward the empty spot where her knife should have been. Her tongue felt dry, but she forced words out in halting English, the language of her enemies. "Why? Save me?" The farmer set the bucket down and studied her with a mix of caution and curiosity. His eyes held no malice, only a kind of stubborn compassion that came from a man who had buried too many and couldn't bear to see another life slip away. He didn't answer right away, and that silence unsettled her more than any weapon could. Outside, the sound of a horse whinnied from the barn, followed by the creak of wood as the wind picked up. The village lay not far beyond the hills, a cluster of clapboard buildings with a church bell that rang every Sunday, a saloon that never closed, and townsfolk who whispered every rumor louder than prayers. If they knew an Apache warrior was lying in a farmer's bed, there would be hell to pay. The army patrols rode through every week, hungry for news, eager to stamp out any trace of resistance. And yet, here she was, hidden beneath the same roof as the man who had chosen to protect her. Her heart pounded with fear and confusion. Was she his prisoner? His burden? Or something else entirely? The farmer moved closer, his steps slow, careful, as though he were approaching a wild animal. He dipped the cloth into the bucket and wrung it out, then extended his hand toward her bandages. She recoiled, pressing back against the wall, her breath sharp with panic. His hand stopped midair, and he let out a long sigh. "I don't mean you harm," he said softly. "But if you tear those stitches, you'll bleed out. Then all this will have been for nothing." His words struck her in a way she did not expect. She had been ready to die, ready to meet the ancestors, ready to accept her fate. But now she was caught in this fragile place between life and death, survival and surrender. Her people would never forgive her for resting under a settler's roof. Yet part of her, the part still clinging to breath, wondered if this strange twist of destiny had some hidden meaning. The fire cracked in the hearth, shadows flickering across the room. The warrior's eyes burned with questions, but her body was too weak to fight, too weak to flee. For the first time in her life, she was at the mercy of someone else's choice. And somewhere beyond those hills, the sound of hoofbeats echoed. Faintly in the distance, growing closer. Her gaze darted to the window, her chest tightening with dread. Were they soldiers coming for her, or townsfolk with torches and guns? She did not know. All she knew was that danger was near, and she was trapped in the home of a man she did not understand. In a world where one wrong step could mean the end, her hand trembled as she gripped the blanket tighter, her body torn between trust and fear. The farmer looked at her with steady eyes, as though bracing himself for a storm he knew was coming. And as the hoofbeats thundered nearer, she realized the night was far from over. Would she escape once more into the wilderness? Or would her fate be sealed here, in the heart of a village that wanted her gone? The warrior's breath quickened, her pulse sharp as steel. She had closed her eyes to die. But now, in this fragile dawn between two worlds, her story was only just beginning. The hoofbeats drew closer, steady as a heartbeat. Rolling over the hills and up the shallow trail that led past the barn and the wine-leaning cottonwood, the farmer crossed to the window and shifted the curtain with 2 fingers, just enough to look out. He stood there a moment, long enough for the fire to pop twice. Then he lowered the cloth and turned back to her. "Riders," he said, 3 of them, cutting across the creek bed from the road. She pushed against the wall, trying to get her feet under her. The room spun and steadied. Her side burned where the needle had closed her skin. She didn't ask for her knife again. She knew it wasn't here, and if it had been, she wasn't. Sure, she would use it, not yet. Not against the man who had kept her alive through the night. He laid a hand on the chair back and watched her. "You can't move fast," he said, "not without reopening the wound. If you try to run now, you'll leave a trail any schoolboy could follow." She heard a soft clink from the porch stirrups against wood. The sound put every nerve on edge. She waited for a hard knock, the sharp voice of a sheriff or a soldier, a demand she'll step outside. None came. Instead, a quiet murmur drifted in. The kind men use when they mean to talk first and push later. The farmer adjusted the blanket at the foot of the bed, so it covered the bandages again. "I'll talk to them," he said. "Stay quiet. If anyone comes in, keep your breathing slow. Let them think you're sleeping off a fever." "Why?" she asked. Her voice was scratchy, but steady enough. "You risk trouble? For me." It held her gaze, as if searching for something he wanted to say, but didn't yet trust the words. Then he nodded once, like a man closing a deal with himself. "This land has seen enough dying. If I can help one person live, I'll do it." The door latch rattled. He stepped out to the porch before anyone could come inside. The murmur rose into clear talk. She eased herself to the window, inch by inch, peered through a gap in the curtain. 3 riders sat their horses in a row. The first wore a battered hat turned down at the brim. Tin star showed dull on his vest, not polished like the showy kind, just there and old, the way a man wears a wedding ring he never takes off. The second was thin and restless, eyes moving from barn to house to sky, as if measuring distances. The third had the broad shoulders of a cattle hand and a railroad cap hanging from his saddle horn. Sign he'd done a little of both in this lean year of drought and late frosts. "Mornin'," the man with the star said. "Heard you were up late. Smoke from your chimney past midnight. Any trouble out this way?" "Trouble?" The farmer echoed, as if the word had a dozen meanings and he wasn't sure which they were selling. "Stage out of Fort Stanton came through with a report," the sheriff said. "Army patrol got into a scrape out by Red Butte. Lost sight of. Who they were chasing came this direction. Folks in town are jumpy. We got a new railroad agent talking about security. You know how it goes?" The thin rider leaned to spit, then wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Tracks near the creek," he said. "Bare feet, blood on the rocks. Somebody's hiding. Could be an outlaw. Could be one of the Apache." The woman felt the word pass through the air like a spark. She kept her breath even and set her jaw, to kill the tremble in it. Her people's name always sounded different in settler mouths, too sharp, too certain. The farmer didn't flinch. "Creek runs past a dozen places," he said. "Every homestead fights a cut foot now and then. You want to search my place, what this is?" The sheriff lifted a palm. "Easy. We're not looking to stir up bad blood where there isn't any. You've been straight with me before. Just need eyes open. Railroad brings freight and strangers. The saloon fills with men who don't answer questions. Wild West or not, town likes order." The cattle hand tipped his chin at the barn. "You mind if I water my mare?" The farmer's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Water's for everyone, same as God's sky." He stepped off the porch and walked with the cattle hand toward the trough, talking about feed and the price of corn, as if that were all that mattered. The thin rider peered at the house windows. The woman let the curtain fall and leaned back against the wall, counting heartbeats inside the room. Time stretched. She traced the grain of the wooden floor with her eyes. Near the bed, she noticed her things on a small table, her medicine pouch, broken rifle set aside with care, the string of small carved beads that had belonged to her mother. She reached for the pouch and closed her fingers around it. The familiar shape of the small stone at its center steadied her. It held herbs in a thin strip of red-clothed things, simple things. She breathed in their dry, honest scent. On. The porch boots scraped. The sheriff's voice came again. "We'll be on our way. If you see anything, send word. Their army's in a temper. Talk of treaties one day and raids the next. It's hard to keep a line when the line keeps moving." "Always is," the farmer said. Hoofbeats faded.
Wait.
The house listened. When the last dull echo disappeared into the cottonwoods, the farmer came back inside. He closed the door with a soft click and pressed his palms to it, head bowed, as if the wood itself could take a share of his worry. She waited. He turned and met her eyes. "They'll be back," he said. "If not them, some other set. Sheriff's a decent sort, but the thin one niches for a chase. The railroad agent's stirring men up, claims a warrior slipping through the hills. Means stolen cattle and burned ties. He doesn't know anything but his own fear." She nodded once. "I will leave when it is dark." "You won't make a mile," he said. "Not yet." She hated the truth of it. Her body pulsed with weakness, a warning in every breath. She looked toward the fire. "A day," she said. "2 nights. Then I go." He moved to the stove and poured hot water into a tin cup, dropped in a pinch of crushed leaves from a jar, and handed it to her. "Wild mint," he said. "Good for pain if you take it slow." She sipped, the warmth easing the tightness in her chest. The cup felt heavy and honest in her hands. She studied him over the rim. "You are a farmer," she said. Though she knew this already from his hands and clothes and the rough way the house was built. "That was a lot of things," he said. "Drove a freight wagon once. Rode with a survey crew for the railroad until I saw what it did to the towns it didn't choose. Spent 1 summer as a deputy in a mining camp. Thought I could keep peace by holding a gun. Then the winter came and taught me otherwise." He pulled the rocking chair closer to the fire and sat, his shoulders sinking as if the chair knew him. "Got this place cheap after a drought scared off the last owner. Figured corn and quiet would do a man good." "Does it?" "Some days," he said. "Other days, quiet is a room too big." She turned the cup in her hands. You have a family? His gaze flicked to the mantel. A small picture sat there, the kind taken by the new cameraman who came through on the stagecoach every spring. In it, a woman stood in a plain dress, a child at her side, both faces set like they knew the camera was trying to steal something. The farmer didn't reach for it. Once, he said, grief hung in the room, not loud, not begging, just present, like a coat on a peg. She didn't ask more. The fire spoke instead. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and let silence have its place. Through the day, the house breathed with routine. He split kindling and pitched hay. He checked on a calf with a bad leg, kept one eye toward the road and another on the sky. Whenever he crossed the threshold, he moved softer than a man his size should. Like he had learned that noise can be a kind of danger. When he came back in with a bucket of water near noon, he found her sitting on the edge of the bed, the medicine pouch open in her lap. She had laid out a small pinch of crushed root and a curl of bark. I need a smooth stone, she said, flat for grinding. He nodded and left without a word, returning with a wide river pebble pale as bone. She ground the herbs and mixed them with a little water, then touched the paste to her side where the stitches pulled. The smell rose like summer rain on hot sand. He watched, not curious in the nosy way, but careful, as if he wanted to learn the shape of her survival. Does it help? He asked. It helps me remember, she said. Pain is a path. You walk it, and it becomes yours. He didn't answer. He fetched a small loaf from a tin and cut 2 slices. They ate without talk, and the bread surprised her with its sweetness. It tasted of the old village down in the valley, where smoke from cook fires rose every evening, and old songs drifted with it. For a time, the room held 2 quiet lives side by side hers, strung with the old stories and the desert's stern mercy, his stitched from fence posts and the stubborn promise of a homestead. Toward afternoon, a dust line showed on the horizon. He saw it first. She followed his gaze and felt her body tighten like a drawn bow. More riders? She asked. He shook his head. Wagon team? 2 mules? Could be the peddler? Could be the railroad agent? They waited. The wagon pulled near, turned up the lane and stopped at the gate. A man climbed down with a ledger tucked under his arm and a hat to clean for the country. He waved as if they were old friends. The farmer opened the door and stepped out to meet him. Afternoon, the stranger said. Fine place you've got. You the owner on the deed for Parcel 12, Section 19? That's right, the farmer said. I'm with the railroad office, the man said. New spur coming through, God willing, an investment holding. We're securing right-of-way and agreements. Good for the valley. It's good for the old American village down there. Church, store, school progress. We're paying fair. God, and we like. Neighbors who help keep the peace. Farmer's jaw set in a way the woman recognized. Men speak of peace when they mean obedience. I tend my own land, he said. Peace follows work. The railroad man smiled like a card player. Towns buzzing about an Apache warrior slipping through the hills. Wild West tale, they say. Some rail hands claim they found fresh prints near your creek. Now I'm not the sheriff. I'm a businessman. A business and safety ride the same trail? You seen anything? Coyotes, the farmer said. Hawks. A black snake in the garden. He folded his arms. You need anything else? The man's smile thinned. He tapped the ledger. We'll be back with papers. Think on the right-of-way. It'd be a kindness to the town. He left as smooth as he came, wheels crunching the hard dirt. The farmer stayed on the porch a long time, eyes on the road like he could read tomorrow there. When he came in, he looked older, as if the day had moved him along. Railroad wants my land, he said, mostly to the room. They'll keep asking until the asking turns into something else. She touched the beads beside her. Why is it always the same? She asked quietly. Lines on paper that cut through lives. Men with ledgers, men with guns. New words for old hunger. He glanced at her. 'Cause the world keeps telling itself it's new. It forgets what it costs. Before dusk, the sheriff returned. Time he rode alone. He didn't tie off at the gate, but came straight to the porch, dismounted, and stood with his hat in his hands. He looked tired. A band of dust rimmed his eyebrows like pale paint. "Got news," he said. "Army patrol found sign near the butte again. They're bringing a tracker to town by nightfall. Says there's blood in the sage and a woman's step. In the prints, that will spin folks up. I'm asking decent men to keep a level head. I figured you're one." The farmer nodded. "Tracker, any good?" "Good enough to keep me from sleeping," the sheriff said. His eyes shifted, not to the door, not to the window, but to the place where a man feels truth press against him. "I'll say this plain. If you know anything, keeping quiet may not be doing anyone a kindness. Army will make a show of this. Railroad will buy tickets." The farmer's voice stayed even. "If I had something to say, I'd tell you." The sheriff studied him and found nothing he could use. He set his hat back on his head. "Lock your door," he said. "Town's not mean, but fear can light it like dry grass." Night slid down the hills in layers. Coyotes called and were answered. The house settled into the sounds of darkness, the creak of wood, the soft tick of cooling iron, the hush of wind at the eaves. The farmer placed a small oil lamp on the table and turned the wick low. He handed the woman a folded piece of rough muslin. "Map," he said, "scratched with charcoal. Shows the dry wash that cuts west behind the ridge. If you have to go fast, follow it. It hides prints. It runs to a stand of juniper where the ground is stone." Her fingers traced the marks. "Why help me run?" "'Cause they'll come looking where they expect fear," he said. "You've got something else in you." She held his eyes and saw the edge of his history, their loss, worn smooth by days. The kind of grief that teaches a man to do one decent thing, even if it sours his luck. The first cricket sang then. A dog barked far off and fell quiet too quickly. Like a hand pressed to its muzzle, she felt it in her bones. Change in the air, the hush before a storm. The way the desert holds its breath when a hawk stops beating its wings. "Listen," she whispered. He heard it too. Not hoofbeats this time. Footsteps on dry grass, slow, careful, confident men on foot, spreading out. A murmured signal. The scrape of a boot against the porch step. Someone who knew how to move without ringing noise like a bell. Someone who had practiced patience. The tracker had come sooner than anyone expected. The lamp's small flame wavered. The farmer reached up and pinched it out with a quick twist. Darkness swallowed the room. In that darkness, she could feel his attention shift toward the door, then toward her, then back again, weighing choices. Her hand closed around the medicine pouch. The map's charcoal smudged her fingers. Her breath found a slow rhythm that she had learned as a child when hiding in rock shadows while cavalry passed overhead. A knuckle tapped the door. Not loud. A polite sound, wrapped in something harder. "Evening," a voice said, smooth as creek water. "Tracks say you've had a visitor. We'd like a word." No one moved. The fire gave a soft sigh as a coal collapsed into ash. The voice outside waited, then came again, still mild, still certain. "Open up," it said. "No need for alarm. We only want the truth." The farmer looked toward her, a question in his eyes. He didn't need to speak. She pressed the muslin into her palm and nodded once, the smallest fraction. The way a person does when the road ahead is chosen and cannot be unwalked. The doorknob turned, the knob stilled. And for a breath, it seemed the whole house was holding itself between two choices, open or break. The farmer's hand hovered near the latch, not touching, just waiting. The Apache woman pressed herself into the shadows, her pouch clutched tight against her ribs, every nerve awake. The fire's faint glow painted the room in trembling red, color that could pass for blood if you looked too long. The voice outside spoke again, softer this time. "No need for fear. I know what I followed. Wounded steps, one set alone. I tracked them to this very door." The tone was calm, almost kind, but the weight beneath it was certain as iron. Whoever stood there wasn't guessing. He knew. The farmer finally answered, steady as stone. "This is a house of one man. You'll find nothing here but my own 2 hands." A pause, then a quiet chuckle. "Every man says that when he's hiding something." Words slipped through. the crack like smoke. The woman could almost see him, the tracker, with eyes like a hawk and boots that knew every mile of this desert. She had heard of men like him, men who lived between two worlds, slipping from campfires to army tents, selling their skill to whoever paid. Some were Apache themselves, turned bitter or broken by loss. Others were Mexicans who knew the ridges, like their own scars. A few were white men who had lived long among tribes and carried their silence back into town. Whoever he was, he had followed her blood across stone. That meant he would not leave empty-handed. The farmer stepped away from the door and motioned with his chin. She understood there was no running now, not tonight. If they fled, the tracker's eyes would read the ground by morning, and soldiers would be on them by noon. Better to let the night decide. The latch rattled once more, firm this time, but the farmer barred it with his weight. "If you want in," he said, "you'll need more than polite words." Silence fell outside, broken only by the wind stirring dry grass. Then Boots retreated, slow, measured, not hurried like a man turned away, but confident, like a man who knew patience was his weapon. He heard him call softly, a whistle meant for others, and realized he had not come alone. The farmer pressed his forehead against the door, then drew back and crossed to the window. He peered into the dark, then closed the shutter tight. "They'll wait," he said, like wolves around a fire. She asked for how long? "As long as it takes." The night deepened, filled with listening. Every creak of the rafters felt louder. From beyond the barn came a faint cough, quickly smothered the sound of another man holding watch. They were surrounded not by a charge of soldiers, but by a circle of hunters who knew the land as well as she did. She lay back, forcing herself to breathe slow, though every instinct told her to be on her feet. Pain bit her side, but she welcomed it. It reminded her she was still alive. Her people, her brothers gone, her village scattered after the last raid. The old stories said a warrior who closed her eyes to die might still wake with purpose. Was this that moment? Or had fate simply carried her into another trap? The farmer sat in his chair, rifle across his knees. He had not chambered around. Not yet. She studied him in the wavering firelight. He looked weary, not from fear, but from a life that had already given him too much to carry. Yet something in his posture told her he would not yield easily. Not to the tracker, not to soldiers, not to the railroad man with his ledger. Outside, coyotes yipped in the distance, and one of the hidden watchers shifted his weight. The night held more than one story now. By dawn they had not moved. When the first gray light slid under the shutters, the farmer rose and set the rifle aside. He poured water into a basin and handed her a cloth. "Best wash the blood from your skin," he said. "They'll come with daylight, asking again. If you look weak, they'll smell it." She obeyed, wiping carefully at her side, her face, her hands. When she finished, he gave her a clean shirt of his, far too large, the sleeves rolled twice. She slipped it on, feeling for the first time in days less like prey and more like someone who still had choices. Not long after, the knock came again, harder this time. The sheriff's voice called from the porch. "Know you're inside, neighbor? Tracker says the trail ends here. Best let us in before the army rides up." The farmer looked at her. "This is where the road splits," he said. Her heart beat steady, though she felt the ground shifting beneath her life. She had no answer for him, yet only the knowledge that every choice ahead would change both their fates. The latch quivered. Again, dust hung in the morning air. The door waited, caught between holding and breaking. The door shuddered once under a heavy fist. The sound echoing through the small house like thunder, dust trickled down from the beams overhead. Ow. Farmer stood between the latch and the room, shoulders set, jaw clenched. His rifle leaned close at hand, though he had yet to raise it. The Apache woman pressed against the far wall, every muscle tight, her eyes fixed on the wood that separated them from the men outside. The morning light cut thin lines through the shutters, dust drifting like smoke through the beams. "Open it, neighbor," the sheriff's voice called. Louder now. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. If you're not alone in there, we know it." Behind him came the murmur of others' boots shifting, a horse stamping, the scrape of metal. The watchers from the night had gathered strength with the sun. The farmer's silence stretched until it became a weapon of its own. Then he spoke, his voice steady but rough at the edges. "This is my house. You'll step through that door only if you mean to take it from me." Pause. Then the sound of the sheriff's sigh, heavy with frustration. "Oh, don't play the fool. You think the railroad will spare you if you shield her? You think soldiers won't burn you out? They want her gone, and they'll use you as kindling to make their point." The woman's pulse hammered in her ears. She could almost see the soldiers marching up the ridge, fire in their torches, her own blood the excuse. She looked to the farmer, expecting hesitation, but found none. His hand closed over the latch like a man daring the world to try him. Then another voice joined, sharp and oily, the railroad agent. "This isn't about one wounded savage," he said. "It's about progress, about land, about the future. You can either stand with us and share in it, or be swept aside." The words dripped like poison meant to break the farmer's will, but the farmer only spat into the dirt floor. "Progress never filled a hungry belly," he muttered, low enough that only she could hear. The voices outside rose, arguments between law and greed, between tracker and sheriff, between townsfolk who wanted peace and others who wanted proof of blood. Horses stamped, tempers flared. The circle around the house grew tighter, as if the walls themselves were closing in. Inside, the air thickened with waiting. The woman's hand slid to the knife tucked under the too large shirt he had given her. She did not know if it would matter when the moment came, but steel in her palm felt better than empty hope. Then the sound of boots on the porch again, single set, firm and deliberate. The tracker's voice spoke, calm as before. "Enough of this talk. You waste time. She's inside, and she knows I won't leave without her." The blood doesn't lie. Silence fell, deeper than before, as though every ear bent toward that voice. Even the sheriff did not answer. The tracker's words carried the final weight, the kind that turned suspicion into certainty. The farmer's eyes met hers. There was no speech in them, only a question. Do we stand or do we run? Her breath caught, torn between the fire in her chest and the ache in her side. She knew this moment was the hinge of all things, the point where her story, his story, and the railroad's hunger collided. The walls seemed to pulse with it, the floor trembling beneath her bare feet. Outside, the sheriff barked orders. Men, moving into place, hooves struck dirt in quick succession. The scrape of rifles being readied split the morning quiet. The woman stepped closer to the farmer, her voice low, steady despite the storm around them. They will come now. And as the latch trembled under a final pounding, the house braced to break into chaos. The pounding at the door grew so fierce, it felt as though the boards would split. Dust shook loose from the rafters, and the fire in the hearth flared as if, startled by the noise. The farmer gripped the latch, his shoulders set, his jaw locked. The Apache woman stood just behind him, knife clutched tight, her breath held against the rush of fear and the pull of something fiercer than fear-resolve. The sheriff shouted, again from outside, his voice cracking against the rising clamor. "Enough. Step aside before blood is spilled." But even as he spoke, the tracker pressed forward, his boots heavy on the porch, his words sharp and steady. "She is here. I will take her." The moment snapped. The latch tore free, and the door burst open, slamming against the wall. Light flooded the room, harsh and sudden, blinding after the dim glow of the fire. Men stood framed against the morning, rifles raised, eyes hard. The sheriff in his dusted coat, the railroad agent with his smug sneer, and behind them the tracker, tall and grim, gaze fixed on the woman as if no one else in the world mattered. The farmer raised his rifle, steady, though his hands bore the tremor of choice. "No further," he said, voice low but carrying. "Not a step in my house." The silence that followed was heavy, stretched taut as a rope pulled between two cliffs. Every man on the porch waited for another to break it. The sheriff's jaw tightened. His eyes darted to the railroad agent, who gave a thin smile, then to the tracker, whose face revealed nothing but certainty. The Apache woman took one step forward, her knife glinting faintly. Her voice was clear, ringing in the small room. "I'll not be dragged like prey. If you want me, you will meet my hand." For a heartbeat it seemed blood would spill. The sheriff's hand hovered over his revolver. Tracker's boots shifted on the porch boards. The farmer's rifle never wavered. And then, unexpectedly, the sheriff lowered his hand. "You've all lost your senses," he muttered. He turned toward the agent. "You think burning down houses and spilling blood will bring peace? You think progress is built on graves? Seen enough of that in these hills." His gaze returned to the farmer. "I won't order a killing on my own neighbor's floor," the railroad agent sputtered, furious, but the sheriff's stare silenced him. The men behind them shifted uneasily, muttering to one another, their anger cooling into doubt. The tracker alone remained still, eyes locked on the woman, unblinking. Finally, he stepped back from the threshold. "This is not the end," he said softly. "The land does not forget, neither does blood." Then he turned, disappearing into the crowd as though swallowed by the morning. Slowly, the others followed, some grumbling, some silent, until the porch was empty and the sound of hooves faded into the distance. The sheriff lingered a moment. Longer, his face lined with weariness. He looked to the farmer and shook his head. "You've chosen a hard road. I hope you're strong enough to walk it." Then he, too, was gone. The house grew still again. The silence broken only by the crackle of the fire and the faint wind pressing against the shutters. The farmer set his rifle aside with a long exhale, his shoulders finally loosening. "Nate," the woman lowered her knife, though her grip was slow to release. They stood facing one another, both trembling, not from weakness, but from the weight of what had passed. "Why did you stay?" she asked at last. Her voice was quiet, almost lost in the creak of the boards. The farmer looked at her, his eyes tired but steady. "Because once, long ago, no one stayed for me. I swore I'd not repeat that wrong." The words settled between them, carrying more truth than any oath sworn on paper. She nodded once, her throat tight with the shape of thanks unspoken. The days that followed passed like a slow exhale after holding breath too long. The woman healed, her strength returning with each sunrise. She tended the animals, fetched water, even stitched torn cloth by the fire. The farmer worked beside her, silent most of the time, but in his silence there was no distance. The bond, forged in fear, deepened into something quieter, something built not on words but on shared survival. Whispers ran through the village, of course. Some claimed the farmer had lost his mind, others that he was protecting a dangerous enemy. But there were also those who saw what the railroad man had nearly wrought, and they spoke softer, wondering if perhaps mercy was not weakness but courage of a different kind. One evening, as the sun bled red across the ridges, the farmer sat on the porch, carving wood with steady strokes. The woman joined him, her wound nearly healed, her face strong again beneath the fading light. "They will come again," she said. It was not a question, but a certainty. He nodded. "Yes, the land is too rich, the hunger too deep. The railroad won't give up." He set down the carving and looked out across the fields. "But neither will we." She studied him, wondering at the twist of fate that had carried her broken body to his bed instead of the dust of the canyon floor. "Then I will stay until the road ahead is clear." The farmer did not answer, but the faint curve of his mouth spoke enough. When at last the day came for her to leave, the morning was quiet, filled with the scent of earth after rain. She stood by the door, dressed in her own garments again, her knife at her belt, her pouch at her side. The farmer handed her a small bundle of food, wrapped in cloth. "You owe me nothing," he said simply. She held his gaze, her dark eyes steady. "Nor do you." Then she turned, stepping out into the wide land where sky met earth, where danger and freedom walked hand in hand. The farmer watched her go, a figure against the endless horizon. He knew the world beyond his fields would not soften, that the railroad's hunger would only grow, that blood would still be demanded. But he also knew that sometimes one act of defiance, one choice to protect instead of destroy, could ripple farther than the eye could follow. The woman walked until the farmhouse was a shadow behind her, until the ridges rose high before her. She paused once, looking back. The wind carried the smell of smoke from a far-off camp, the sound of a hawk's cry circling above. She lifted her face to the sky, closed her eyes for a heartbeat, and opened them again with the steady calm of someone who had crossed the line between death and life and chosen to keep walking in the years to come. The story of that night lingered in whispers, how an Apache warrior closed her eyes to die, but woke instead in a farmer's bed. The Afar sheriff stood against greed, how the land itself seemed to draw a line between what could be taken and what must be defended. Some called it legend, others a lesson. But those who had seen it knew it was neither. It was only life, hard and fleeting, carved out of dust and bone and choice, and somewhere on the edge of the horizon, where the land stretched wide and the sun bled gold into the earth, the woman walked on, her shadow long, her spirit unbroken, carrying with her the memory of a farmhouse that had become, if only for a time, a place of mercy. That was the true ending, not a battle won or lost, but the simple truth that even in a land shaped by steel and hunger, humanity could still take root, stubborn as the desert flowers that bloom against all odds,